Hello, dear audience. We are together for the next show, and we, as promised, will be continuing the topic that we left halfway last time. And that was about the dark sides of our heart, the darkness of our heart. It is the tool that is helping us to direct our steps towards God, that we are created by the image of. And that's the tool that gives us the impulse that we cannot live without that God. But in the meantime, as you heard and learned last time, that heart has some dark corners and will cause some problems in our spiritual journey. Different scientific or spiritual leaders explain this differently. And the goal of our today's topic is to show what these dark corners are. And in a sense, we have to probably in the future speak about all the sins, at least all the deadly sins, in separate time, and explain what these sins are, how they raise in our soul, in our heart, and how they put obstacles in front of us. And in the meantime, we will also go to the practical part of the topic and speak about how to get rid of those deadly sins, how to change our course, what is the difficulty of changing the course, and how do we get out of the place that we are. I have a friend who brings this very visual example and says that when somebody falls into a swamp, at first it feels very uncomfortable, stings, but over the course of the time, even the stinginess and the swampiness of that environment kind of starts soothing because you get used to it. And after a certain period of time, it feels like that's your native place, that's where you belong and you don't want to get out of it. So our purpose today will be to show how to get out, and to show, first of all and most of all, that we need to get out. So we will speak about the heart a little bit. We'll speak about how to get out of it and what are the obstacles. And again, Presbyteria Kyriaki is with us, and she will give professional advice from both theological and psychological perspective. So now please, because we have, I assume, wide variety of audience, use all your knowledge and tools to explain as good as possible this very important topic about the heart. And I would like to start this way. We were speaking about becoming or being God without God. In Soviet countries, when the communism started, they were saying that the purpose of communists was to create heaven on earth with no God. In some respect, if we look at the ideology of the communism, it's beautiful. It's amazing what their perspectives are about the life. But it failed because there was no God. Same thing maybe can happen to the human beings, and maybe to the country that we live. Please, if you can explain how can the human being become God and not have God with him. And so after that we'll speak about all the failures.
This is a good place to start. We're starting by jumping into the deep end of the pool. And we said in our previous visit, which was shot just earlier today, that one of the ways ancient Christianity through the centuries has understood the fall of Adam and Eve, how sin entered the cosmos, is through their desire, their falling prey to the desire to be God without God. In our understanding, Adam and Eve were perfect in one way, and in a place of perfect becoming in another. They had whatever it meant to be the image of God in them, all the gifts of what it means to be human, and this potential, which is, so in some ways they were babies, of growing in relationship with God so that they could, according to our understanding, co-reign with God in paradise. That was the objective. But because they fell to the temptation, personified through the serpent, of trying to get there without God, and they try to take a shortcut, we say as a quick definition of the sin, the original sin, it's the sin of pride, which is the desire to be God without God. And so everything has fallen as a result of that. That's when sin and death and limitation, our finiteness, ours as well as creation's, was introduced into the cosmos. And so you ask the question, how do we overcome that? And one of the things that I think in humanity generally, but especially with our society today, is that to acknowledge that God is God and we're not. To acknowledge that we are, in the end, spiritually poor. You said earlier, even during the break, citing the first beatitude that Jesus taught, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What was Jesus talking about? If, in other words, he's saying to his disciples and friends, you have to become poor in spirit. What does it mean to become poor in spirit? To be poor in Greek, according to the New Testament translation, the word that is used is ptochos. We have to become ptochos, or ptochi in plural. Most people in our society, when they think of poor, of ptochos, even in contemporary Greek, we will think of people whom we notice in society who are barely making it, people who are struggling. They may have a place to eat. They are finding some way to eat. At the same time, they are being noticed. This, according to the strict understanding of the term ptochos, the poor, which is the way I think Jesus used it, is not what Jesus was referring to. The ptochos that Jesus was referring to was those persons, was anyone who would not be considered a member of society. And so not the working poor or those barely getting by who are suffering, there's real suffering there, but those instead who are invisible, who are not seen. What comes to mind are the lepers, for example. They could not be seen in society. They were not to be engaged. They had no life. They had no place. In India, for example, even though thankfully, as a democratic country, they have grown past the caste system. But the lowest level of the caste system in India, and they still have to work through some of the psychology around this, were the persons who were called the Dalits, the untouchables. Okay? Jesus is referring to the Dalits. And so he's saying, blessed are the Dalits, those who are poor in spirit. We are poor, we are called to be spiritual Dalits. So, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
In what comparison we are supposed to be like them?
By recognizing our utter inner poverty. That we, in the end, did not make ourselves. We did not cause ourselves to be born. That everything we have, our intelligence, the relationships we've been given, our education, the opportunities we've been given are thankfully, perhaps we've acted on those. Yes, we have to make good use of we are stewards of what God has given us. So I'm so grateful. Many of us have taken advantage of those opportunities presented to us. But all of that is a gift to us from God. That we have done nothing to distinguish us from anyone else regarding being worthy of these gifts. And all of us who live someplace with a roof over our head are gifted in some way. And so for Jesus to say, blessed are the poor in spirit, is saying that we are called, happy, blessed is in Greek makarios, which can be called happy or happy in the Lord. It's a kind of blessing of joy in relationship with God. And so happy in the Lord are those who are spiritual Dalits, meaning who claim, recognize their utter poverty and dependence on God. What are we? Here's the paradox. We are, and maybe I shared this at an earlier time in a visit with you, we are specks of dust or specks of clay created in the image and likeness of God. That's an astounding phenomenon when you think about that. And so the more we acknowledge that all of this is a gift, the more that we see every opportunity, every person we meet as a possible encounter where we can be changed, where we can be loved and offer love in the presence of the loving God. And so from the very beginning, we are called to reorient our whole understanding of who we are in our lives. We are called to acknowledge our utter poverty and say thank you.
In the movie about Mother Teresa, when she's very disappointed in the end, and she walks in the streets of Calcutta, and then this old, very poor, hungry, starving old man is laying down on the ground, and their eyes meet somehow, and he says, "What are you looking for, daughter?" And she comes to her senses and says, "I don't know if I have done all these things and I have done it right." And he says, "Don't worry, because the good Lord does not forget his good servants," or something like this. And she finds the answer of her question that was bothering her so long from that lepers, or
from a Dalit.
yes, exactly. That when you said that, I remember that image, that really a person who does not have anything, with
who are treated, people who are treated like garbage.
Yes, then he has. And many times I have been thinking about this also, on the words of Christ where he says, "Whoever fed one of those least brothers of mine did to me." Working in the store, I have this customer who would come to the store maybe once a month or twice a month. Extremely poor, extremely dirty, smells horrible. When he enters from the door, you can smell that he's coming from the other side of the store. And every time I see him, I feel like Christ is there. And people complain, they want him out of the store. And it's impossible to ask him to go out. I can't ask him to go out because I feel like I'm kicking out Christ from. This is an extreme situation, but sometimes I feel I would like to be like him spiritually. Doesn't have any connection with anything.
You're describing an ancient vocation that has been with us in the life of the church from almost, I would say at least we know of, through the early 4th century, and that is the vocation, the ministry of the fool for Christ. And that is the person who personifies the poverty. He or she is someone who, and it's a rare gift, thank you God. I don't think, I'm a fool in many ways. I'm grateful that my foolishness will be expressed in other ways. But they are people who reject the mores of society. They reject the values of society in some way, so they can mock it. So they can mock, whenever society tries to be God without God, they point out to it. Whenever people try to be God without God, they easily point out to it because they don't fit in, and they look kind of crazy to the average person. We in America would say they definitely are crazy and perhaps schizophrenic or delusional for sure. But either they are delusional or they are very real, and the rest of us are living in a delusion. Because it is very easy to sleepwalk our lives away, living a kind of entitled life. You know, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that, it's sequential. And by this age, one of my students, whom I love very much, said to me at one point when he was given this honor, which I was so happy for him, he said, "Yes, my career is going just the way I planned. And I'm thinking, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. Because this is that entitlement. This is not an attitude of gratitude, but a kind of, it's about me. And in that moment, and he's a wonderful person, this man, and I hope he never sees this, and even if he does, he probably won't remember saying this to me. But he's a wonderful person, and normally I don't think he's like this. But in that moment, he slipped and forgot to thank God that all is a gift. And so it's important to gratefully make use of the opportunities and talents and chances that come our way in a way that bear good fruit, knowing at the same time that we are called to bear witness to the giver of the gifts and not get fixated on the gifts themselves. Then they become attachments and they become idols.
And now I remember the writer who saying that in ancient Egypt people would worship a cat or an onion or something. This is foolish now, but the idols haven't disappeared from our lives. They have just changed their forms.
Yeah, just say status has become an idol now. Popularity has become an idol now. Celebrity has become an idol now. What would we do if we weren't worshiping the idol of celebrity with all that extra time? It would be a wonderful thing to try to think about.
Yes, and these all are connected to the dark side of the soul or dark side of the heart.
That's when we are high, so to speak, like an addict. We don't have to, we can be addicted to alcohol, we can be addicted to drugs, we can be addicted to behaviors, we can be addicted to celebrity, as I said to you, we can be addicted to sex, we can be addicted to success, we can be addicted to excitement. The first one of the, I will quote him, Dr. Patrick Carnes, a noted, I think is a psychologist, I've now forgotten. He's written many books on addiction, especially sex addiction, and a very thoughtful man, and has done a lot of research on addiction and addictive disorders, would say, and I befriended him a number of years ago, he would say to me and to a small group at a conference we were at, he said, the first addiction of all is the addiction to power. Never forget that. Okay, and so there's the addiction to power. So never forget that. and as opposed to giving glory to being a servant to the power of the loving God, getting back to attachments. That addictions basically are attachments that we see.
Yes.
But an attachment is anything that we have committed ourselves to, that we have put value on, that takes attention away from us as if it were God. And it has its, rules, it has its regulations, it has its own fruits, and it has its own perks, so to speak. But in the end, the fruits in time show themselves. And so the fruits are usually not healthy. The fruits are usually not life-giving, they are life-effacing.
When we originally started thinking about this topic, this thought came to me over and over again, that we for sure have to speak about those things that nobody knows. That there are things inside of us that, except us, nobody knows about it. And sometimes it can cause a lot of problem. And in my life I have realized that I look at the person in front of me like he or she is a fool, because they treat me in a way that I'm not. And I know it, but they don't. So this is very important. I have experienced it personally, and I would like you to, if you have anything to say about this type of darknesses inside of the human being.
May I ask, whose darkness are you referring to? The people who are misunderstanding you?
No.
Or your reaction to these people?
No. The darknesses that are inside of me that you cannot see from outside, because, like, for example, if you are looking through a window and you are in the light and there is darkness inside, you don't see what is going on inside of that room or a house, because there is darkness from the physics perspective. The same way I was imagining that the human being is kind of a dark room where there are so many things and only the owner knows what's inside?
Well, not really. The owner has an idea. The owner can only know of the body of our lives. We can only know what we know. God knows more.
Yes.
Knows everything. But all we have to do is show up and acknowledge as best as we peacefully can in the presence of God that which we know in the moment. We don't have to get overly obsessive. We just have to be as peaceful and clear. And so, for example, what you're talking about, there's a Greek word, you're talking about logismi, right, which is the thoughts that go in and out of our heads. And that's why being in relationship with a spiritual director, a spiritual father or mother, to be able to talk about these thoughts.
Okay.
Some are, who will have, this person will have more experience than you or me, and will be able to say, that maybe is coming from a place, well, at least will help you sit, will help me sit with where those are coming from, so that we can better focus our attention on the good, on God's will for us. I am very concerned about Christians and others who become obsessed about evil, who become obsessed about sin, who become obsessed about the dark side. Why? Because there comes a point when naming it is one thing. By naming the evil, by naming the bad, we expose it. Because until it's exposed, sometimes it's trying to masquerade as God. So that's not good. So by naming it in the presence of God, it gets exposed. It doesn't like being named, but because it has less power. But it still has a lot of power, but at least it has less power once it's named. Once it's named, and we've done everything we can by naming it, we have to do other things that feed the good and serve God, that starves the bad and feeds the good. Why I say this is because if sin, if evil, whatever this was that's been introduced into the cosmos, could be reduced, the smallest piece, if we could take the smallest piece of evil, the smallest piece of sin, you were saying physics, if it could be reduced to something scientific, let's say smaller than an atom, what's the smallest material we can see in an electron microscope? I think it's called a quark. Maybe there's something smaller. If we could take a quark of sin, that quark, that piece of sin, is more powerful than all of humanity that ever was. All right? So we can't say, oh, I just sinned a little bit and blow and make light of our own sins. And look at so-and-so, he or she is way worse than me, and then we become very prideful and very hypocritical, and we're far better off than they are. A quark of sin, if I could use that, outweighs all of humanity. So in some ways, we have to recognize that's part of the surrender. That's part of recognizing we are finite. We are powerless even over a quark, all of humanity, of sin. And so the good news is acknowledge that, and we turn to the good. We turn to God. We work for the good. And so that's a very different perspective than focusing, obsessing only on the bad. We have to name it. That's really important, because denying it feeds it. Okay. But obsessing about it feeds it also.
Okay, that's a very important point. Now I would like to bring a couple examples from the New Testament where when the Pharisees come to test Christ with their sneaky questions and stuff, he doesn't get excited or anything. He's very peaceful, calmful, and then the author says that he knew what they were thinking. That's one example. When Satan tries to test him, he gives the right answers because he knows what's going on inside of the other object. So it's open to God completely. And yet Christ never went around and punished anybody for their sins, even though he saw them clearly, purely. But also he never gave anybody spiritual advancement as a gift. He said, you're free from your sins, and they got better. But does that mean that they were free from their sins forever or not? And how much effort do we need to put into it? God can see our sins. We can see some of it. The other people can see less. What is the way of digging those sins out, and how much effort do we need to put in to get free from it?
It's not our job to make ourselves sin less.
Mm-hmm.
It is not our job to take care of that. That's God's job.
Mm-hmm.
All we can do is turn our attention to the love of God and share our hearts with Him, ask for forgiveness, make amends wherever possible,
Mm-hmm.
and confess it if necessary with someone else, and proceed from there.
When he writes the sins of the people around Mary, he wants to say that I can see your sins. And the second, that you have sins, acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
Second, when they are gone, he tells Mary, go and sin no more. In other words, you have part to do.
So your point was, whoever it was, if it was Mary Magdalene or if it was another woman, the woman that was caught in sin,
Yes.
he said to her, sin no more.
Mm-hmm.
And she left a friend of God.
Okay.
To leave a friend of God, he released her from the shame that had been weighing her down. When people are oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
when people are abused, there's often trauma and shame mixed in, and neglect, all right?
Okay.
And invisibility mixed in with the weaponry in trying to control that person to be something he or she isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the Lord did with that woman, if it was Mary Magdalene or not, this is what he did.
Mm-hmm.
It says something deep about how he treated everyone, including Mary Magdalene, that he rectified their life with him, with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so not the definitions of who she was by her accusers, they were trying to act as God by saying she was less than garbage.
Mm-hmm.
He was treating her as an equal. They were having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
She called him Lord. And so in the end, she left with, in a past visit, I referred to being, leaving with dignity, but with dignity and wholeness. She left whole. And so while his parting words to her in that story were, sin no more, she did not leave the same person
Mm-hmm.
who was caught in the act of adultery and sin. She left a more authentic to who she really was in the presence of God. God saw her for who she was, and I bet you a cup of coffee, that she, for the first time in her life, experienced herself
Mm-hmm.
authentically.
Her real self.
Her real self, the person who God had called her to be up to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And for him to say to her, go and sin no more, I'm sure for her, she felt 100 pounds lighter, that she was a new person from that time, and that she grew from there. If it was Mary Magdalene, obviously, and if it wasn't Mary Magdalene, it doesn't matter,
Yes.
because I would bet a second cup of coffee that she grew from there, and more wonderful things happened because
Mm-hmm.
she was trusting the love of God in her life and letting that help her make the decisions she needed to make with her everyday life.
We were speaking about poor in spirit, who are invisible to society. They're so out there that people don't even think about them. And then we have an oppressed, abused woman who can be one of those invisible ones. The sin that is present in the life of that type of person, and the loss of self-dignity that is present in the life of that person, doesn't it separate that person from God? Because we see that Christ...
Yes and no. Let me interrupt you. That's so
Mhm.
important what you just said. Yes and
Yes.
no. It separates them experientially. They
Okay.
feel separated from God because trauma does that.
Mhm.
Invisibility does that. Being shamed does that. It makes us feel cut off from the love of God. Nothing separates us from the love of God, ever.
Okay.
Nothing. And so that's a relief because all of us can go through times in our lives when we feel completely disconnected, but we are always in the center of the palm of God's hand, all of us. That we recognize it is a different thing. But God knows our hearts. God knows our soul. God knows those of us who have experienced depression, are experiencing depression, oppression, invisibility. And so God is a merciful God and does not judge us the way we may be judging ourselves because we've taken on the voices of our tormentors or the real tormentors that are perhaps somehow in our life for real or in our past. And so one of the wisdoms of the ancient church that contemporary psychology is affirming, which is really a wonderful thing to see contemporary psychology affirming insight that's centuries, many centuries old, is that when a person is oppressed, when a person, male or female, is enslaved to something that they are forced to capitulate to because of whatever. It could be in a time of war. It could be in an abusive home. It could be, there's so many ways that people can be oppressed. Free will lessens. And it never disappears, but it lessens. If the ancient wisdom of the church recognizes this, and so there's more compassion for the person who's in the less powerful side, who, while he or she still makes choices, he or she is still accountable for those choices. It's also taken into account within the sickness and the malaise of the abuse and the life-effacing energy that sucks part of their own life energy, life power away from them, and they are less able to make the choices they need to make. It's a poignant recognition that the church has made over the centuries, and contemporary society, and through psychology also has. And so this is why it's wonderful to trust the loving mercy of God. If, for example, the woman who was caught in adultery, who was sinning, she was sinning. But I bet this was a life that she had been not maybe actively chosen to go into, where she was tracked down. Think about it. She was tracked down. They followed her. They had her routine. They knew what the people trying to catch her. And so she was an easy mark, by the way. So they weren't trying too hard. And so she had already been living a life that was maybe, some would say, treating herself like garbage. And so the Lord understood all that from the inside out, why she would do that, how come that would happen. And he freed her from that fully, completely, and with dignity and wholeness for her.
I completely agree with the fact that we all are in the palm of God's hand, and no matter what we are, where we are, God is always with us. But one important factor is our acknowledgement and our rejection. And in this situation, you may have heard this many times, that when a person is in a very bad situation, when the person loses hope, will say, well, the life has done to me this. I don't believe in God anymore. Even people will curse God. God still loves them. Sometimes loves more, because Christ says, whoever been forgiven more loves more. And God knows that if He forgives these people, they will love Him more, for sure. But the acknowledgement and reversal of the rejection is very important. Christ did not heal anybody who didn't ask Him to. Now, being poor in spirit, being invisible, wouldn't keep us in that rejecting state of mind where we will never turn to God.
I think you're raising a very difficult issue. Again, God knows our hearts, and God knows our souls, and God knows our suffering. And there are people out there, sometimes maybe they're in our own families, or maybe they're in our neighborhood, who have given up. Have they permanently given up or not? I don't really know. God sees that in their hearts. They are never outside the love of God. I will not sit in judgment of these people who, I may know some of these people, I may love some of these people who are caught in the trance of the abuse. Let's say it's abuse. Right? There is a Roman Catholic, she's considered by many Roman Catholic mystic. She never was baptized, a Jewish philosopher who died during World War II in France. Her name was Simone Weil. I'm not sure if I remember her, I'm saying her name correctly. And I read some of her work, which is astounding and beautiful. She talks about being visited by Christ while she was praying the Lord's Prayer in Greek. She learned 7 languages, and she was praying the Lord's Prayer, and Christ came to her while she was praying the Lord's Prayer in Greek. Ever since then, you know, I learned the Lord's Prayer in Greek first. I've been saying it a little bit more with more appreciation, knowing her life story. And she would talk about oppression. She would talk about malheur, which I think that's how she wrote about it in French, which in English could be called affliction, which is the gross, the extreme suffering that people sometimes are forced to endure, be it in a concentration camp, be it in a horrifically abusive situation under our own noses in our own communities, be it in a war situation happening any place on the planet. And she would say that when a person is afflicted and they suffer malheur, half of their soul disappears immediately. Half of their ability to do anything good disappears immediately. And the best they can do, there comes a point when you can't even pray. And she said the way these people are saved is sometimes they even forget about God. This is how I understood. They cannot even conceptualize God because they are just so beaten down. They can't even do that. Then the best they can do, and God sees this, and this will save them, is turn their heads toward the good. For the good is God. And never stop turning their heads toward the good. So that's an insight that I take with me about how do we approach people who have been suffering in this way. Now, on the other hand, what are we doing to alleviate this kind of suffering? Are we awake to the situations around us where people may be suffering in ways that has not caught our attention because they have made themselves invisible because they are capitulating to the abuse? Or to the negativity, or to the spell of the trance of the lies, that they are junk when they're not. What are we doing?
In this case, I remember also from the New Testament when Christ revealed the absolute truth, shocking truth. People would slowly disappear, go away. And that's probably part of the darkness in the heart too of human being. When we see the suffering and we turn our face, isn't that part of the darkness in our heart when we don't want to?
Either we don't want to because we don't want to acknowledge it, that's a little bit more selfish, or we want to and we can't bear it. But even to acknowledge that is a kind of prayer, is an act of compassion, to say, I can't bear it. My failure is different. It's still a failure, but it's different in the sense that I'm recognizing my brother or sister is broken. And it is so overwhelming to me, I'm too broken to be able to fix them. Do I pray for them? Do I do something to try to address the situation, even if it is to tell someone else, or to do something good? I think it's important to also remember that I don't want our time to be spent in the end, to be remembered by the two of us or by anyone watching, about that the darkness in us is only about the evil. We have to name our own selfishness, we have to name our pride, we have to name our evil intentions, and then surrender them to God and ask God for help and turn to the good, because God abides in us even when we don't feel it. There's a saying that goes back to the 4th century again, St. John Chrysostom, and he says, find the door of your heart, and you will discover that it is the door to the kingdom of God. Find it. And so what I tell my friends when we're working about what's in our hearts, and we haven't gone, there, I'll say a lot of our unaddressed issues are in there, and some of our unaddressed attitudes, and some of our not so pretty parts of ourselves are floating around there, kind of like, if I may say the word poop, kind of our inner poop is there. But God is in there as well, and God is more powerful than the poop. And God even saturates the poop. He isn't the poop, but he saturates it and has power over it. But we sometimes have to look at it, even swim through it, going deeper and deeper to those places in us where his love calls us and where he abides.
Now, to finish with a happier note, I would like to bring one example that my friend told me. He's a very intellectual person. He studied sciences, politics, religions, all kinds of things, and he doesn't believe in God. He's not afraid. He's not afraid to say that. He's saying that that's not something that I can talk about. But he has this idea of helping people and creating a society where a human being is happy, where there is justice and there is truth. And his question to me was, what does religion do towards this? My understanding and my answer was that Christianity, specifically, because I don't know any other religions as well as Christianity, I know a little bit about Christianity, so I can speak from that perspective, that does not have agenda of creating a happy society on the planet. It's about human souls. Christianity, Christians or saints are on this planet to save souls for heavenly life. But yet we saw how dark it gets, how thick it gets when we start talking about the suffering, about abuse, about pretty soon tomorrow or day after tomorrow is going to be another year passed after the Armenian genocide, and the world will start talking about genocide again. And when you speak to an Armenian who doesn't believe in God, will tell you, how can I believe in God if things like this can happen? And so my friend's question was this: if Christianity cannot help people, why do I need it? What is your approach? What is the Christianity's, what is the spirituality's purpose on this planet for individuals and for society? One more thing, and I will let you to answer. And the Crusades, what they were trying to do? They were trying to make the world a better place.
If I remember church history correctly, the Crusaders also fought against many Orthodox Christians. And for various reasons, some Orthodox Christians fared worse than others. And the Greek-speaking Christians fared very, very badly under the Crusades. But getting back to spiritual warfare, I hear that theme in what you're talking about.
Yes.
That this is spiritual warfare that is conducted in the heart, in our own attitudes, and our own behaviors. And so, with your friend, for example, who, I don't know your friend, but I trust you, if you love this friend, and if he's a man of peace, trying to promote peace, and not some people who are kind of on a crusade in a way that's not peaceful. And he is really seeking justice and truth, and he's trying to grow in justice and truth. Well, for me as an Orthodox Christian, and for you, and this is something we've talked about, justice and truth are a person. So he may be growing in Christ, and he may not even know that's what he's doing.
I'm almost positively sure that it is.
I would think that, you know, from what you described. And so one of the themes that one of my dogmatics professors in Greece would tell me is that the Lord came to end all religion.
Mm-hmm.
Religiosity per se does not save. God saves.
Mm-hmm.
The Basileia, the kingdom of God, is what saves. And our turning to Him and trusting that and growing in that is saving us and one another and the creation around us. And so that's a different take. And it helps us be more relaxed with the people that we encounter in our day-to-day lives, I think.
Mm-hmm. Our time is getting really short. I don't want to go over the time again. I'm happy that we kind of came to a relative conclusion and a happy note. Thank you very much. This is just the beginning. We should discuss these things more, because the more we talk, more questions come. Thank you very much again, and thank you all the audience who are following, who are taking something to their lives, because I don't want these programs to become self-purposed. My call to you, dear audience, is if you have questions, please send us through the email that you see on the screen, and let us make it a two-way relationship rather than one way. It would be more healthy if we exchange thoughts, we know what you think and what you agree and what you don't agree with. So it will become more healthier and will grow healthy. Thank you again, everybody who supports and helps, and especially you, Dr. Kiyaki, for your time and energy. And thank you, and have a good day.